This is the biggest scam that's ever been pulled by a cult. Because you're not causing their suffering. It's the religion that's causing their suffering. Dr. K, I was raised in a cult. How can I overcome my fear of setting boundaries with my very religious family when the consequences may be excessive, including complete ostracism and eviction from my home? Okay. Hey, Dr. K, this is a problem I've been trying to come to terms with and overcome for several years. Here's some background. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, but no longer believe in it. I'm what ex-JWs call physically in, mentally out, because I still feel compelled to go through the motions to maintain a relationship with my family. This is an extremely controlling and insular religion which requires exclusive devotion to its doctrines for all its baptized members. I got baptized as a child before I ever had a chance to know much at all about the outside world. I wanted to believe my parents, friends, and role models were telling the truth, and I was told by many as a child that I would die at Armageddon if I didn't eventually get baptized. I decided it must be true if they believe it. So as a kid just beginning puberty, I dedicated the rest of my life to the religion in front of 1,000 people and have since been held to that promise of devotion and duty and a high moral standard. A few years later, I already had doubts, but it was too late. I was already in. If I decided to tell anyone how I felt, I'd be deemed an apostate, kicked out of my home, and shunned by my family and friends. My late best friend was ostracized, disfellowshipped, and was unable to speak with any of his family or friends for 6 months, trying to show his best that he was repentant and worthy of friends again. He was reinstated at that point, which was actually pretty short when it comes to disfellowshipping, which usually lasts years. Even so, his social life was completely shattered and he was pretty much a shell of himself. Broken, traumatized, depressed, and guilty. He ended his life shortly thereafter. There's trauma for me around all that because I don't want to end up like him, not to mention the fact that I loved him. He was my best friend for years. I also took part in the shunning as was required and feel partly responsible to this day. Doing that to him changed my perspective completely. It ruined his life and he completely fell apart. All because he lied about drinking a little too much at a party. He was over 21. And the elders deemed him an unrepentant sinner and had him disfellowshipped. I've seen it happen over and over again to so many people I love. The thing is, my parents are victims in this too. They were both traumatized, coerced, and taken advantage of themselves. This religion gave them a sense of security when they had none. If they believed they had a choice, I know they'd never shun me. They'd accept me for who I am, knowing this only makes it harder because I love them so much and I don't want to hurt them, but I know I will. And that's the thing, they don't have a choice. They have been told and truly believe that God will punish, maybe even kill them at Armageddon for being disloyal and breaking the rule of shunning, and that I will ultimately die at Armageddon if I'm not shunned because it's a strategy designed to use emotional distress to bring sinners back to the religion. I love them so much, and I know how much they love me. It just breaks my heart that their beliefs and those holding so much power over them in the cult have put them in such a horrible, horrible position, which is so unnatural for a parent to be in. Now I'm 28 and am currently living at my parents' house. After pandemic layoffs, I was able to save some money through unemployment insurance, and I've been using as an opportunity to meet new people and develop marketable skills. I now have an opportunity to start a job doing something I absolutely love in a couple of weeks, but there's a good chance this will cause quite a bit of conflict between me and my parents because of our differing beliefs. This new job will likely force me to actively distance myself from my family's religion, and I know they're going to confront me because I won't be taking part in required service or meetings. They are compelled by religion to pressure me to stay in. Eventually, I know where this will lead, and I'm terrified. Before long, I may even not have a home. Please help me find the courage within myself to do what I know is right for me. This, to me, is my dharma. This feels like the opportunity I've been waiting for, and I'm not going to put it off for a religion I have no interest in being a part of, now that my beliefs have changed. I know this was long, and thank you for understanding. P.S. I would like to add another reason ostracism is so hard to deal with, because they pressure others to avoid worldly non-JWs. People accept for when it comes to work-related things or preaching. So even though I've been meeting some people here and there, I don't actually know very many people outside my family's religion, and thus ostracism would mean being completely cut off from about every family friend I know, including my brother, sister-in-law, nephew, niece, grandparents, and extended relatives. There are very few people I could reach out to besides my therapist and some extended family out of the state, but that's it. Okay. So let's understand a couple of things. The first is that when people think about, so I'm going to talk a little bit about abusive relationships, okay? So the first surprising thing that I learned about abusive relationships is that most people assume that abusive relationships are propagated out of negative emotion. And there's certainly truth to that, right? So like, if you think about an abusive relationship, what we think the person is feeling is a predominance of like fear and shame. And that's absolutely true. Those things are there and they're very prevalent. But in my experience, the most surprising thing about most abusive relationships is how they're propagated by like feelings of love and loyalty. So if you kind of think about, having an abusive parent and like why you can't set limits with them, it's not because of fear. It's because of guilt, right? It's because of like emotional manipulation around positive emotions. So this is something that's really interesting in Western society, is that we tend to think that some emotions are good and some emotions are bad. Like pride and love are good things, right? And love is what it takes to make a marriage. But let me explain to y'all that love is absolutely what destroys half of marriages, right? It just happens to be love with someone who's not your partner. And so good emotions, so in the East, if you look at the yogic perspective, good emotions and negative emotions are equally good and equally bad, right? The problem is that we don't really view them that way. So the first thing that I want people to understand is that if you're in an abusive relationship, the things that are going to tie you to this relationship are actually the positive emotions just as much as the negative emotions. So let's think about this person and why they're thinking about staying, right? What's their hesitance to leave? They've already decided the religion's not for them. Easy, done. And I wouldn't doubt that there are lots of people in cults who stay out of fear or shame or whatever. But I think there are probably an equal number of people, or maybe even more people, that stay out of the religion out of love, right? So even, for example, like when the Jehovah's Witness tell the parents, you have to shun your child, what do you think is the primary emotion that they're using to get parents to shun children? It's not fear or shame, it's actually love. So just think about this for a second. What is the reason behind shunning them? If they don't come to the right way, they'll die in Armageddon, right? It's actually love, because you don't want your child, you have to shun them because you love them. The more you love them, the more you've got to shun them, because you have to bring them back with all of your energy. And it's love, right? It's like they're playing on the love. And if you don't ostracize them, then we're going to, like, I think oftentimes when it comes to parents and children, the love of the child is like the primary thing that causes parents to react the way that they do. And so the first thing to understand about situations like this, and especially abusive relationships, is that they get propagated out of positive emotions just as much as negative emotions. And if we kind of think about like how the manipulation happens, it's like all manipulating a sense of love, because this person is basically saying, if I leave, my parents will have to shun me and I don't want to hurt them. So what's keeping them stuck? It's love. It's loyalty. So the first thing to kind of think about is that if you're trying to leave an abusive relationship, it's not just about overcoming fear and overcoming shame. Those are definitely big pieces of it. And for some people, they're the majority of it. What tends to get people tripped up is that you have to overcome love too, right? You have to overcome guilt. That's something that people sort of understand. Guilt is sort of a negative emotion that is oftentimes rooted in a positive emotion. It's like, why do I feel guilty? Because I didn't do the right thing. But that in turn depends on your definition of what the right thing is. So you guys get that? So first thing I'd say is that if you're trying to leave this kind of thing, you have to understand that you have to do things that will make you feel like a bad person. Like you don't want to hurt your parents. Therefore, you're not going to leave the religion. You guys get that? So what you actually have to overcome is your ability to hurt your parents. And herein lies the biggest amount of gaslighting that happens in abusive relationships and cults. Because who is actually doing the hurting? So this is what's crazy about emotionally manipulative So how can I say this? There are some relationships that I've seen with kids, especially with their parents, where the child is held emotionally hostage. And this is what cults do. They hold people emotionally hostage. And what are the chains that keep you hostage? It's love. Because this is kind of bizarre. So the greatest trick that cults ever pull, that also happen in individual relationships, is fooling the person who's leaving into thinking they are responsible for their parents' feelings. Do you guys see what's happening? The cult is saying, if the child is saying, if I leave, my parents will be devastated and they'll be forced to shun me. They'll be forced to choose between me and all of their social friends, because if they don't shun me, if they keep a relationship, they're going to get shunned. So if I leave, I will cause my parents this suffering. This is the biggest scam that's ever been pulled by a cult, because you're not causing their suffering. It's the religion that's causing their suffering. But the religion has actually brainwashed you into thinking that you have this in your control, that if you stay, your parents will be okay. They put that responsibility on you, and they sort of kind of give you this idea that your parents' well-being is due to your behavior. This is how they tangle everyone in, right? Because the cult's not responsible. They're not the one, like, just think about that. Like, if your parents why can't your parents maintain a relationship with you if you leave? It's because the cult isn't letting them, right? The Jehovah's Witness isn't letting them. You actually have no responsibility over that. The real toxicity is coming from the cult. And this is what's so crazy about this level of brainwashing. We see it in individual relationships, especially with like narcissistic parents, where kids will fool themselves or be brainwashed into thinking that the emotional well-being of the parent is their responsibility, right? And we'll sometimes even see this too. Like, so I remember I had a case where, there was two kids that were traumatized. So one of them was my patient. And then, the parent would be like, if you don't clean up, I'm going to get angry. And when I get angry, I'm going to hit your sibling. And when I hit them, it's going to be your fault, right? This is the kind of crap that kids get brainwashed with. When the parent misbehaves, it's your fault. We see this in all kinds of gaslighting, where we'll see this in unfaithful partners. Yeah, the reason I cheated on you is because you work so much and I was lonely and you weren't there for me. Therefore, my cheating is your fault. It's your fault that you weren't around. So we do this. This happens a lot with emotionally manipulative people, is they place the responsibility of their behavior on the person. And in doing so, they're holding them emotionally hostage. Even with earlier when we're talking about visiting your parents for Christmas. Oh, if you don't visit for Christmas, I will be sad. And then the kid feels guilty and they're like, oh, I shouldn't make my parents sad. Right? They're not accepting responsibility at all for why doesn't the kid should want to visit for Christmas. What the hell? Just think for a second about why they don't want, that's like, what kind of situation have you created that forces your child into a particular kind of behavior that causes them to suffer to give you emotional benefit? Same thing is happening with the cult. Because somehow this person has been tricked into thinking that their parents' health or well-being is in their control. If I stay in the religion, my parents will be happy. If I leave the religion, my parents will be sad. Therefore, their happiness or sadness falls to my actions. And once their happiness or sadness falls to my actions, then I'm emotionally held hostage, and I'm trapped in the cult out of nothing to do with fear or shame. It's out of love. But this is what you really have to understand, is that it's not, their happiness or sadness is not yours to control. Right? And this is where you kind of think about it a little bit from a karmic perspective, or like an Eastern perspective, which is like, it's your job to take your actions, and your actions may have outcomes, but what your parents choose to do is on them. Right? So if they choose to sever themselves from you for their religious belief and they suffer because of that, that's a choice they're making. And you think that they're going to make a particular choice, you'd also be surprised. So I've heard this a surprising amount where people will leave the cult, and sometimes leaving the cult will bring people with you. That's why cults are so scared about people leaving. Because once one person, once one sheep, breaks from the pack, it's other sheep are hey, what the hell's going on here? So I had a recent case, maybe about a year or two ago, someone leaving, and then what they were surprised by is that their parents, their dad, actually was honestly, I haven't believed in this stuff for a long time either. I just did this stuff because I thought it was like there were some good things to it, but I haven't said anything to you. So it turns out that like dad wanted to leave too. And then like daughter left, dad left, mom left, and everybody left. Doesn't happen often because there is brainwashing going on. So in terms of like what should you do if you're in this situation, remember that your dharma is to live your life. Should you try to take care of other people? Absolutely. Your dharma is to take care of your parents. But don't accept responsibility for things that are not yours to control. So your parents also have to, like, you can't accept responsibility for your parents' actions or feelings. You can only accept responsibility for your actions. So you have to decide what's more important to me. Escaping the cult and like thinking about also like thinking about the karma. It's not your karma. Your karma was to be born into this situation. Your karma was to be born into this situation. And a lot of people think that karma means destiny. It doesn't mean destiny. Understand that every day you live, you have the opportunity to sow seeds of new karma. So you have a choice right now. If you leave Jehovah's Witness, there's a decent chance you'll, meet someone one day, maybe get married, maybe have kids. And then what kind of karma are you creating for your kids? What kind of circumstance are you going to create for your children down the line if you leave the cult? Versus if you stay in the cult, for the sake of your alleviating your parents' distress, what kind of karma are you sowing for the next generation? Right? So your duty is, by all means, to yourself. I think you have a duty to your parents as well. But your duty to your parents does not include, how can I say this? It can't include the decisions that they themselves make. And I see this a lot. This is really challenging also like in addictions. So we'll see this with family members of people with addictions, where the family member, like the person has the addiction and the family member will try so hard, oftentimes parents, to help their kid with the addiction. They'll mortgage their household, send them to rehab and things like that. And since they love their child so much, and then kid like says, screw you, like relapses, pieces out for a while, and then kid comes crawling back 6 months later and is like, hey, I found rehab. It's $40,000 for a month. Mom, can you take out a second mortgage on the house? And then the mom is like, sure, because you love your child, right? And so you do your duty and you try to help them. And then like you can try to help people like as much as you want to, but at some point you've got to realize that they themselves have to take responsibility for their situation. You're not putting them in this situation. The religion is putting them in this situation. They are putting themselves in this situation. They've already put themselves in this situation. So you have to be very careful, whether you're in a cult or in an abusive relationship, about who is actually responsible for the situation that everyone is in. And all you can do is take the actions that you think are right. And so take strength, because dharma is all about doing the thing that is difficult. It's not about what's easy. And so I think this is a good example of like doing dharma is sometimes doing things that go against your positive emotions because it is your duty. So I'll give you guys an example. So there's this story, there's this Indian epic called the Mahabharata. And in the Mahabharata, there's this guy named Krishna, and Krishna is like supposed to be an incarnation of God. So he's an incarnation of the god Vishnu. So he's like all powerful. Thing is, when he incarnates, he's kind of OP, but not everyone realizes it. So like not many people know he's God. So this one of his like cousins or something has a kid, and the kid is born with like 6 arms, I think. And so there's this, they call an astrologer, and the astrologer is like they're trying to figure out what's going on with this kid. And the astrologer says, whoever picks up someone is going to pick up your child. And when they pick him up, 4 of the arms will fall off. And that person will be responsible for, the death of your child. So the person who like gets rid of the arms is going to be responsible for their death. And so the mom is like handing the kid to like all kinds of people. And one day Krishna is visiting. And it's kind of weird. It's a weird story. There are lots of weird stories. They're also nested. So there's like a lot of related stuff. So there's like a past karma and things like that to this person. So then one day she hands her son to Krishna, and lo and behold, 4 of the arms fall off. And then mom starts freaking out because mom realizes, oh shit, this is Krishna. Like, if Krishna is his enemy, like my son is screwed. There's no way, because he's an incarnation of God. And she's like, Krishna, promise me that you'll never do anything to hurt my kid. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Why do you think I would hurt your kid? Like, I won't hurt, like your kid's great. Like, I don't have no peace. And he's like, no, promise me you won't hurt my kid. Promise me you won't hurt my kid. And Krishna says, I swear that if your child insults me even 100 times in a single day, I won't touch a hair on his head. Okay? So mom is like, whew, easy. Okay, he swore this. He's a man of his word. And so he's like, totally fine. So years go by. Turns out that the kid his name is Shishupal. And he's like a complete ass. Okay? And so then like many years later, like he's grown up and he visits a court. He visits the court of one of a different king, Yudhishthir. And he goes into the court, and Krishna's a cowherd. So he's like sort of noble, but he's like he grew up in like a village. So he's actually a cowherd. So he wears like simpler clothing and things like that. Plays the flute and stuff. So he goes to the court and he sees that like in the court, there's the king, and like in a place of honor is like Krishna is sitting. And there are a lot of like more powerful kings that are sitting like lower down the table from him. So Shishupal he's like, what the hell is this? Like this guy's a cowherd, and there are lots of like kings who are more prestigious than this guy. And like, why is he being given a seat of honor? Right? And because Shishupal's been like tolerated, because Krishna's been tolerating his crap. And so he goes on insulting Krishna. And when he starts insulting Krishna, people get pissed because Krishna's in a place of, respectable seating for a reason. It's because a lot of people respect him. And so some of his nephews are like, dude, if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm gonna like take you outside and teach you a lesson. And Krishna's like, no, like let him talk. Like don't intervene, let him talk. And so Shishupal gets riled up. And so Krishna has the option to, not let anyone defend him. And so Shishupal goes on insulting him 51 times, 52 times, 60 times, 70 times. Everyone's like getting super, super pissed. How disrespectful is this guy? Krishna's sitting there, and with each insult, he starts to smile more and more and more. And he's like, no, go ahead, let him speak his piece. Say more. Keep going, Shishupal. Keep going. Say whatever's on your chest. If you think I deserve disrespect. And all of Krishna's friends are like, bro, like, what is going on? So he insults him 101st time. And then Krishna he's got this thing called the Sudarshan Chakra, which is like a spinning disc, lops off Shishupal's head. GG. The 101st insult. So this is the key thing, right? You can't control what your karma places you in, but you have to do your dharma in a particular place, right? So in your situation, sometimes, like, you can't control what your parents' situation is. You just have to act for yourself. And this is where when they shun you, the most you can do is say like, look, this is a situation. If you guys want to shun me, that's totally fine. You can even say, I forgive you for shunning me. This religion isn't right for me. And I think that any religion that forcibly separates their parents from their children is not a religion that I want to be a part of. And at the same time, I understand that this is like a big part of your life, and I don't blame you for doing it, and I forgive you. That's totally fine. Like, I forgive you for this. I don't believe in holding grudges. I don't believe in shunning people. I think it was wrong. What happened with my friend was wrong, and like, I'm going to do this job. I'm not going to go to the required services, and if we have to distance ourselves, we have to distance ourselves. I love you guys. If I'm never allowed to talk to you again, I love you from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to try to go live a happy, healthy life, and I wish the same of y'all. I'm going to miss all of you guys, but if I have to go, I have to go. I understand that. I'm not going to blame you for that. And then you do what is dharmically correct. And even though it's going to hurt to say that, you may never see your parents again. So that's absolutely going to hurt. I'm glad you have a therapist. You're going to talk through all that stuff. You're going to go to this job of your dreams. And then the cool thing is you say, the only people I know are some family a few states over. No, but you're going to learn, you're going to meet a ton of people. Right? You're going to go to this new job and you're going to learn how to make friends. And the problem, one of the karmic problems with life is that you don't get to choose your family, which is why it's so great that you can, to a certain degree, choose your friends. So you're 26 or 27 years old and it feels like a long time, but you have 40, 50 years to go. And you can cultivate relationships with the kind of people that you want. Is it going to be traumatic? Absolutely. Is it going to be difficult? Absolutely. Is it going to be devastating? Absolutely. But generally speaking, transplants are, right? So the last thing I'll leave y'all with is just something from medicine. Because what this person needs, if you're part of a cult, essentially what you need to do is a life transplant. So like if you think about what a transplant is, like a kidney transplant, what we're literally doing is there's a part of a whole organism, right? So you're part of this whole organism. And we cut you out of that. And you leave everything that you've ever known, everything that you've grown up with. And we can actually move you into another human being. And you can actually live there and start to function there. It requires a lot of adjustment. right? We have to give you some medication to prevent like, host rejection and all that kind of stuff. But we're able to do this. So in your life, you just have to understand that it's going to be a transplant. You're going to come out of everything that you've always known and been comfortable with. That's going to feel like your body, right? It's not just family and friends. It's your entire life. And you're going to be alone for a time, and then you're going to find a new place to go. And it's going to be a bumpy ride, don't get me wrong. But chances are it'll be the right one. Because I think what we know from ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is that most of them tend to be pretty happy about leaving. So transplants can absolutely be difficult and traumatic, and can also be absolutely life-saving. So if what you need is a life transplant, do it. Right? And get the support that you need. Make sure that if your parents are never going to talk to you again, that you forgive them if you can, that you don't blame them, and you can say like, I've learned some things from the religion. And that's like acceptance and forgiveness. I don't know if Jehovah's Witnesses teach that kind of stuff. I thought they sort of did. But maybe not. I don't know. So be careful about emotional manipulation. Be careful about your positive feelings. And be careful about being held emotionally hostage. Be careful about situations where you feel responsible for circumstances that were never yours to control to begin with, because that's how it works. They make you feel responsible. Oh my God, I'm going to hurt my parents. No, your parents had a choice a long time ago. It sounds like they joined Jehovah's Witnesses and it helped them a lot. And so they have a choice today. It's not your job to take away that choice from them. It's your dharma to make the choice for yourself and let them make the choice for themselves, right? They have to choose what's more important to them, their religion or their child. And they're allowed to make that choice. And when they make it, it's going to hurt like hell, because chances are they won't choose you, but you may be surprised. Life is very long, right? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe they'll run into you. Maybe you send them a letter every now and then. They can choose to burn it or not see it or whatever. You'll tell them, hey, you've got grandkids. Here's pictures. Miss you guys. You never know. So be careful about, making decisions today and like assuming that it's going to be for a lifetime, because the world is changing very rapidly, right? 10, 15 years ago, we didn't even have smartphones, and now there's a global pandemic, and now there are massive changes to the way the world is working. 100 years ago, no one could have fathomed that someone would have difficulty going outside. So the world is changing very rapidly, and I think the most you can do is make the right kind of decision for yourself. And good luck to you. So here's a question. So if I'm leaving home for college and my parents get sad because of that, that's not my responsibility. So let me ask y'all a basic question. Yeah, we're going to meditate today. Let me ask y'all a basic question, okay? Whose responsibility is someone else's feelings? And who is responsible for your feelings? So it's kind of interesting, right? So I'm going to leave y'all with that question. So this is something that's happening a lot nowadays, which is that, I think there's a subtle dividing line between what we do and how it affects people. So I'll give you guys just a simple example. So, let's say that I'm dating someone and I get them a pumpkin cheesecake for their birthday. And it turns out that they're devastated and they start crying when I give them a pumpkin cheesecake. And then I'm really confused, and then they feel terrible, and then I ask, like, what happened? And they're like, well, I had a twin who was allergic to pumpkins. And the day they died, they ate a pumpkin cheesecake. And so by giving them a pumpkin cheesecake, I have created all this negative feeling for them. So, like, who's responsible for that, right? So sometimes I can feel guilty because I gave them a pumpkin cheesecake. Sometimes they can blame me. They're like, you're an asshole for giving me a pumpkin cheesecake. My actions have created a negative emotion, right? And so who's responsible for that? Let's say the flip end of the spectrum, hate speech, right? So if I engage in hate speech, that is also an action that I'm taking that makes someone feel really bad and they start crying, or bullying, let's say. So who's responsible for that? So I think it's really tricky because the world is definitely moving in the direction of if I feel a particular way, it is your fault. Right? That's the direction that the world is going in. And I think it's dangerous because what we're doing is we're actually outsourcing the control of our feelings to other people. That's a dangerous game. Right? So I personally like the yogic view, which is that I take actions and I should be held responsible for my actions. Right? So I should speak from a purpose of ahimsa, nonviolence. So in the yogic view, hate speech is wrong because the intention is to hurt another person. And at the same time, it is my responsibility to manage the feelings that I have on the inside. And this is kind of interesting because even as I've worked with people who have suffered from things like, like transphobia, homophobia, racism, things like that, as I've lived myself with those problems, what I sort of discovered is that I can't control what they say, but it is to a certain degree within my control how I manage my feelings. So this is where someone can insult me and they can damage me and they can hurt me, but there's also a certain layer of emotional independence that I'm allowed to have. So I get to take control of my emotions. That's something that I'm not willing to give up to someone else. Another good example of someone who illustrated this principle really, really well is Viktor Frankl. So in Man's Search of Meaning, Viktor Frankl was in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. And he sort of discovered that there's like an internal independence. Marcus Aurelius is another example of someone who did this. And so I think that's kind of like where Stoicism comes from, right? So I think these are kind of situations where when you kind of say are you responsible for your parents being sad? In a sense, yes, because you are leaving, right? But I also think that sadness is their responsibility. And also that and this kind of goes back to earlier what I was saying about the yogic point of view where good and negative emotions are the same. Sadness can be good and happiness can be bad. It's kind of bizarre, but generally speaking, I think that that's true. We can get a lot of benefit from sadness. We can get a lot of benefit from fear and shame. I think if we didn't get any benefit from it, we wouldn't have evolved to have those emotions. And we don't feel happy permanently. We don't feel joy permanently, right? And in fact, when we feel pride permanently, what do we call that? That sometimes gets called narcissism. So is it your responsibility to not make your parents sad? I mean, you can do that if you want to, but something tells me that if you stayed home from college, they'd be sad anyway, right? What are you going to do? Stay home for the rest of your life? How are they going to feel when you're 40? Are you going to feel pride, happy? You just stayed at home your entire life? So you can only control your actions. You can't really control how your actions affect other people. I know it sounds kind of weird. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't consider how they're going to affect other people, but, it's like kind of a bizarre situation. So if you look at some people enjoy, being, I don't even know, if you look at, we had a talk about BDSM the other day. So when you think about, sexuality, you don't think about pain as a part of that, but that's what some people like, right? So different people like different things, and all you have to do, you can only do what you believe to be right. And I think as long as you're, what are you operating from? Are you operating from a place of ahimsa, of nonviolence? Or are you operating from a place of hatred? Or are you operating from a place of love? And sometimes you can do things that are loving that are also will upset people. So sometimes I try to teach, I was saying, restraint over restriction. Sometimes I have to set limits with my kids and they become sad. But I do that and I don't want to make them sad, but I still think it's important to be a good parent and teach them how to brush their teeth every day, because I think that's something that will help them in the long term. So it's tough. So I think that's where, when you say what's your responsibility if you're going to college, I'd say your responsibility is if they're going to miss you, that you should try to call and text or video call them as often as possible, right? You can do that. You can say, hey, I miss you guys too. I'm having a great time at college. I'm learning a lot. And you can also study really hard because you are causing your parents some degree of sadness. So you can make their pain worth its while by you excelling when you guys are suffering for this, right? So this is something that I understand very well because I was gone for 3 weeks and it made my kids sad. So that's where I have to make it worth, I inflicted sadness on my children by going to TI. And so they missed me for a long time, and like that's sad. So I'm going to do my level best to like make sure that that was worth the time. You make it worth it.